In this video, I'm going to give an ownership review on each of my recent AMGs and cover exactly what they've cost to run over the last few years in maintenance and repairs. Then I will add up the running costs of each car and talk about a few things to keep older Mercedes, or really any car, on the road. Let's start with my 2007 CLK63. I got this car in 2021 with 28,000 kilometers, and now it has 36,000 kilometers, or just over 22,000 miles. Of course, finished in Designo graphite with the M156 under the hood. In 2021, I started things off with a DIY engine oil change, costing about $70 including filter. I also added new MAN air filters for $26. Then I changed the spark plugs, which cost $91. I also replaced the trunk partition struts, which were $45 for the Stabilis units. I added new Michelin 4S tires, which would set you back around $1,200, as well as a few cosmetic things here and there. In 2022, I changed the engine oil again for $80, and I also replaced both of the trunk support struts for $42. I ordered the OE Stabilis ones again, and this time I got sent the genuine Mercedes part with the star logo, so definitely don't pay 3 times more for the one listed as genuine Mercedes on these parts sites. Get that Stabilis one. I also polished the paint with my usual process. And finally, I had the AC recharged because it was getting a bit weak, and that was another $160 to have it done professionally. In 2023, I changed the engine oil, once again, at $90. So the total maintenance spend for this car is at $1,804 for parts, and then about $500 spent on cosmetic fixes, with a majority of that being spent on the paintless dent removal, which I got done. Although 2 years with 0 issues on this car is not always going to be the case. Just prior to buying the car, the left fuel sending unit was replaced at a cost of about $1,400 because of a leak. And a few other key jobs such as replacing the coolant and the brake fluid were done in 2021, just before my ownership. So overall, this car has been very good to own. It's cost me very little, but it has such low mileage and does not get driven that much. I've covered about 8,000 kilometers in 2 years, or about 4,000 kilometers per year. I'm trying to keep this car as nice as I can given how well kept it's been for the last 16 years. Now let's look at the 2005 E55, which I recently sold after almost 4 years of ownership. This car cost quite a bit more to run than the CLK, but it was driven more often. I bought this car in 2019 at 69,000 kilometers and drove it to 87,000 kilometers, or just over 54,000 miles. In 2020, I did a lot of work to this car. Engine oil change, $70, air filters, $33, coolant, $60, transmission wiring connector, $15, and then transmission fluid and filter, $105. And finally on the transmission, I changed the conductor plate, $180. The front suspension was refreshed with new lower ball joints and control arms, with the parts coming out to about $305. I had the rear main seal repaired for about $800, including labor for that job. I installed new xenon projector bulbs for about $90, just because the old ones were slightly discolored. And on top of this was lots of cosmetic restoration in 2020. In 2021, I changed the engine oil and filter again, $70. I changed the accessory belt, it was $36. I also changed the 16 spark plugs, which was $159 for the correct NGK plugs. The front right air suspension strut collapsed, so I replaced both front struts at a cost of around $1,200, but with a refund for the cores of about $150, so those 2 struts came out to just over $1,050 overall. In 2022, I changed the engine oil once again, To start off the year, $70. The alternator burned out and I replaced it with an OEM Bosch unit that cost $256. I also changed the brake fluid for $35. In 2023, I just continued with our yearly oil change at $80, and new tires were right around $1,000. So in total, everything comes out to $4,414, plus about $750 of cosmetic restoration to the car, and $300 for that upgraded heat exchanger that I did. Now, all of these parts costs are in US dollars, including shipping cost. Reasonable, but almost everything on the car again was repaired myself, so the labor cost of some of these jobs, if you would have had them done, would have racked up quickly into the thousands. So let's say more like $8,000 in total repairs if you were to include labor. Nonetheless, it's worth the money because it's a near 500 horsepower sedan that still looks the part. Let's quickly finish with my 2011 E63, which I bought this summer. I picked up the car at 76,000 kilometers and now it's at 81,000, or just over 50,000 miles. I started with an engine oil change which cost $100, as well as air filters, $23, and a transmission fluid service which cost $200. Then I replaced the valve cover gaskets, which were $60, and spark plugs, $85. I changed the engine mounts as well as the transmission mount, which came out to $390. Cabin filter was replaced as well, $25. Then I had to address the rear air suspension, which was sagging a bit until it collapsed on the rear passenger side. I just used the R-knot replacements as I did on the front of the E55, and the job was done. Total spend for these rear springs was about $460. Moving on to the next thing, I came back from a drive, and there was a faint squealing sound from the engine, and I found that the oil dipstick was popped up. Immediately, these are symptoms of a broken crankcase breather valve or PCV valve. Thus, it'll need to be replaced, as well as removal and installation of the intake manifold. Cost of parts for this job, $167. So the total part spend for this E63 comes out to $1,510 so far. But again, if you were to add labor costs, this number would more than double. So a relatively busy first 6 months with this E63, but it's getting dialed in. Owning an AMG Mercedes is a good experience if you play it smart, buy good examples, and take care of them. It's important to remember that not all of these cars are equal, and it is generally true that the more these cars cost new, the more they will cost to run. Let's take the price of a brake service for example. On the E55, the front brake rotors are $360 for a pair of genuine Mercedes discs, and there's plenty of OE options that are less than $300. On the CLK63, with the fancy two-piece discs, you're looking at over $2,000 for a genuine Mercedes pair, with OE Brembo options still well above $1,000. So on some models, servicing the brakes is low cost, and on others, it's a rather large investment. Now there are also some general things to check on to avoid issues with your Mercedes or really any other car and make your ownership easier. One great tip is to inspect all of the drains on the car for any leaves or debris. There's lots of cases of something getting plugged and water getting into an area where it's not supposed to be, especially on an older car that's left outside. If the car sits in a garage, it's obviously not going to be an issue, but still, it's an important thing to check. Another thing is to get a battery tender if you don't drive the car very often. It keeps the battery maintained and ready. Trying to stick with a weak battery is not great for the car. This might sound obvious, but don't defer service and maintenance that needs to be done. Even down to the tires. If they are 8 to 10 years old, you should consider replacing them, even if they have lots of tread left. In terms of service, I like to change the engine oil every 5,000 miles or 1 year, whichever is first. This is especially true with the M156 63 models, with all of the potential camshaft wear issues at higher mileages. And checking the oil level at least every month if you drive the car regularly is a good idea. Lots of people ask if I use any oil additives, and the answer is that I usually don't. I did try putting Liqui-Moly Ceratec in the E55 on the previous oil change, but I didn't notice any difference. I'll just stay on top of the intervals, and I'm currently using the Motul 5W40 in all of my cars, but really any Mercedes 229.5 approved oil is good. And when you can, take these cars out for a nice long drive. They really don't like going out for 10-minute trips here and there. It's just not what these engines were designed for. And that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel, take a look at my store. Link is in the description. If you want to see more Mercedes and AMG content, subscribe for more videos like this one.